Welcome to Classic Take, Season 3, Episode 16. The topic we will discuss today is: did the ingathering of the exiles already begin? The past so many years, particularly after the establishment of the State of Israel, so we've seen many Jews coming back to the land of Israel, and it would seem, in the eyes of many, that this is the fulfillment of the prophecies of the return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. And there's a lot of confusion and conflict and controversy on the subject. I would try in the following few minutes to present briefly the approach of the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, on this topic. And I would just make a few introductions before I start this topic, which is, first of all, I'm well aware there's people who are going to have many questions and many different ways of thinking regarding this. There's no way that within this short amount of time that is allocated for this topic, they were able to go through everything. Also, the point here is not to debate. The point is more to present a perspective. I'm trying with my best to present the perspective as I understand it, that the Rebbe shared for many times. And another point is that the purpose of this discussion is not really related in any practical way, in the sense, it doesn't mean that if you look one way or the other, there's any less reason to support the Jewish people living in the land of Israel. That's completely not the point of the discussion. The discussion is more focused on the interpretation and meaning of events, not on what is our obligation towards the people living in the land of Israel. And last but not least, most importantly, I'm going to make it very clear that since this topic is very nuanced and requires a very, very fine line of bridging between different topics, some things I'll say are clearly, explicitly the Rebbe's approach and the Rebbe's words. Other things I will say are maybe my understanding of the Rebbe's words, not necessarily that this is the final word on the matter, might be mistaken. And I will also add, I will make it clear, I will also add some of my own understanding, which I feel is based and gleaned based on the Rebbe's approach, but that's purely my understanding of the sources. Many times the Rebbe spoke about the fact that there's a lot of disagreement regarding the events, that fact that many Jews have returned to Israel even before the establishment of the State of Israel, particularly after the establishment of the State of Israel. And there's very, as well aware, it's not a secret, there are many different approaches amongst the Jewish people how to relate to this, amongst religious Jews how to relate to this. The discussion we're going to have here is very, very focused discussion. We're not discussing here how to relate to the to the ideology of Zionism, for example, which is a completely separate discussion. The question here is really only one particular thing. Sometimes people get confused with all other topics that get tied in, and it's very hard to understand what we're focusing on. We're focusing on one very simple, specific point: is the fact that the Jewish people return to the land of Israel. Does that itself mean that we are seeing the ushering in of the future redemption? Are we seeing the fulfillment of the prophecies regarding the ingathering of exiles? In simple English, did the redemption already begin? Do we have the Ischalta, the Gula, the beginning of the redemption by the fact that people have come to the land of Israel? And not only are there different conflicting opinions in people's minds and people's approaches, and there's it's tied into many different points and opinions of how to understand many different things. But even within Torah itself, if anybody opens up, the teachings of our sages, you could reach different conclusions regarding how the future redemption will take place. Some people will posit that Moshiach could only come in a miraculous way. The fact that Jewish people are coming to the land of Israel in a natural way without the miracles that are shaking up the heaven and earth cannot be considered the final redemption. Other people will say, bring proofs from other sources, which may be implied the other way around. The Rebbe's approach, on the one hand, was very profound and nuanced, but also very And the basic approach of the Rebbe was extremely simple. He really zeroed it down to one very simple formula. He said there could be many different approaches, theologies, opinions, understandings, but it all boils down, just like in Jewish ideology, Jewish sources, in the Talmud, in the Medrash, there could be many different opinions. The bottom line is, but then there's halacha, then there's the opinion that is formulated as actual Jewish law. And when it comes, let's say, to interpreting passages of the Tanakh, of the scriptures, many times commentaries take the liberty of interpreting them in different ways, maybe in ways which are not consistent with Jewish practice. For example, if the day follows the night and the night follows the day, which according to Jewish law, the day follows the night, the day starts by sunset, and the daylight is a continuation of the day that started the night before. And other commentaries would take the liberty of interpreting passages in the Torah otherwise, because that's totally fine. The Torah has room for different interpretations, but when it comes to actual practice, comes to actual halacha, there is one halacha, there's accepted viewpoint. Sometimes there is differences of opinion of what the viewpoint is. But as a starting point, we have to go to halacha. We have to see what is the halacha, after all the different opinions, what is the practical application as it's formulated as Jewish law. Now, the Rebbe says when it comes to Moshiach, people will say, where do we find that Jewish law discusses Moshiach? Well, we do find it. We find it in the Rambam. The Rambam is actually the only codifier of Jewish law which codified the laws of Moshiach as a coherent system. And even though he's only one person, but as we also know that whenever the commentaries of his time disagreed with him on matters of Jewish law, they said it, whether it was the commentaries or the Ravid, which always argues on the Rambam where he feels necessary. So the Rambam says he's the only one that codifies a halachic formula of how the redemption unfolds. And the Rambam is not, while commentators of the Rambam disagree with him on other issues, but they don't disagree with him on this particular point of how the redemption unfolds. And the Rambam basically says that we'll say it in English, if a king from the house of David arises, who is diligent in Torah study and occupies himself with mitzvahs like David, his ancestor, according to the written Torah, according to the oral Torah, and will wage the wars of Hashem, and will compel all the Jewish people to follow the ways of Torah and to mend its breaches, and he will wage the wars of Hashem, then he is Cheskas Mashiach, which is interpreted to mean he's assumed to be Mashiach. If he was successful and he was victorious over all the nations around him, around Israel, and he built a temple in its place, and he gathered Kibbutz Nitchei Yisrael, he gathered the Nitchei, the far-flung Jews that were, cast away. So then he is Mashiach Bevade, then he is definitely the Mashiach. So the Rebbe says the wording of the Rambam is very concise, and also the order of his words are concise. The Rambam is describing here how the redemption develops. The Rambam describes that a king will arise who will, first of all, be diligent in Torah study and fulfilling mitzvahs himself, and he will compel all the Jewish people to do the same. That's stage one. Then stage two is when he's waging wars in stage one. Stage two is when he's victorious in those wars and he's established a complete, true Jewish independence in the land of Israel without any fear of enemies or surrounding nations. Then the next step is he builds the Holy Temple, and only afterwards comes in gathering of the exiles. And then, only once he does all that, then you know that he is definitely Moshiach. So basically, according to the Rambam, we see that the gathering of the exiles happens after. That's really the last thing on the list of the requirements that Moshiach has to do. Now, obviously, there's many, many other things Moshiach will do. I mean, Moshiach will be a king that will, even though according to the Rambam, Moshiach will eventually pass away, but Moshiach, the Rambam himself explains in Laws of Tshuva, Moshiach will be teaching the whole world about the knowledge of Hashem, which happens afterwards, after he built the temple, after he gathered the dispersed of Israel. But these are the unfolding of the redemption takes place in this particular manner. So therefore, the Rebbe, nobody disagrees with the Rambam on that particular point. So the Rebbe says, true, there are sources, let's say there's some sources say that the Holy Temple could be built before Mashiach comes. But the Rambam doesn't say that, and nobody on the Rambam and the generation of the Rambam, the subsequent commentaries of the Rambam, nobody disagreed with that, even though maybe there are other earlier sources and other in the Talmud which might suggest otherwise, but the Rambam formulated this as a halachic, formula of how things are going to develop, and nobody disagreed with him. I mean, nobody and nobody disagreed with him lahalacha. None of the commentators on the Rambam which are there either to explain his words or disagree with him, made any amendments over here. So basically, the Rebbe says this is the accepted formula that the ingathering of exiles comes after the building of the Beis Hamikdash. Now, the Rebbe says, the person can say, so what's going on? If there's a lot of Jews in the land of Israel, so that's not considered the ingathering of the exiles? So basically, the Rebbe says, well, look at the Rambam. The Rambam says that Moshiach will build a temple. He's going to wage war. He's going to build a temple. Obviously, there must be a lot of Jews living in Jerusalem and in Israel if he's building the temple, right? But nevertheless, the promise, the prophecy of the Torah about the gathering of exiles, it's only really considered to have taken place after the building of the Beis Hamikdash. It could be there'll be Jews, maybe many Jews in the land of Israel. But that in of itself is not yet the fulfillment of the prophecy of Nidchei, of the gathering of the dispersed of Israel. The gathering of the dispersed of Israel, the halachic, in other words, the legal, the actual, the practical, full-fledged, and what's relevant to be considered as a fulfillment of the Torah's gathering of the dispersed of Israel takes place after the building of the Beis Hamikdash. So based on that formula, the Rebbe says we could start theologizing from today till tomorrow, but ultimately this is not the order that the Rambam the formula that the Rambam wrote lahalacha, and therefore this is not yet what we're seeing today is not yet the fulfillment of this prophecy of the Torah. It's not yet the fulfillment of the ingathering of the exiles as the Rambam is describing it. Now, so the question is, so what is the meaning of what's going on? Well, that's a whole separate point, but in the context of the Rebbe's words, I want to highlight a few points. The Rebbe, there's another point that the Rebbe explained, which is sometimes not fully understood and overlooked. The Rebbe explains like this: there is a concept, something that is called a process that leads to the redemption, right? You have, for example, our sages tell us that the day that the temple was destroyed, that day, the day that the exile started, the redemption also started. Moshiach was born. There was a baby boy born that was ready to become Moshiach. So the process of redemption already started in a certain sense. Moshiach was born. But everybody understands that process of redemption is a process of Hashem putting into the world different events that will ultimately lead to the redemption, but we're not yet at a stage of redemption. On the contrary, most of the terrible persecution started the day after the temple was destroyed. So in other words, we have to differentiate between a process that leads to the redemption and the redemption itself. To put it a little differently, we have to differentiate between something that begins the redemption but is still part of exile, and it's just a process that will eventually lead to the redemption, to the actual redemption, which coincides with the end of exile. The beginning of the redemption simply means that the exile comes to an end. When Mashiach was born, the exile began, but the redemption began, but exile also began. So yes, a person could say that the events that unfolded in some way prepared the setting place for Mashiach to come. That might be true. But on the other hand, that is not yet the actual redemption. And this is a very subtle point that's sometimes hard to internalize and digest, because it's from the one hand, a person could accept that a certain event is a process that leads to the redemption, but there's a big difference between saying that and between taking the leap and saying this is the redemption itself. This is the actual unfolding of the redemption. So you have the Rebbe sometimes has discussed, even termed in some instances, the return of, particularly when it was focusing on Soviet Jewry and others, that that finally were able to go to the land of Israel as a foretaste of the gathering of the exiles. Or the Rebbe even termed it as a miracle of the gathering of the exiles that's taking place within the time of exile itself. Meaning that there is a certain, yes, technically there are Jews gathering into the land of Israel. This, in some way, shape, or form, could be considered as a beginning process of the redemption, in the sense that this is something which, is a beginning sign. It's a small a miniature taste of the redemption, maybe even, or even events that are being placed by Hashem in order to allow for the redemption to unfold. But ultimately, it's not the actual redemption. And while it sounds like a very subtle point, it's really, it's a world of a difference. Because if somebody interprets this as the redemption itself, he basically says that what's going on now is the Jewish people are actually now being redeemed. And besides the fact that it could lead to, there's many questions that come up. So what is all the persecution that's going on, and so on and so forth, but also leads to incorrect interpretation of events. And what happens is that instead of imagining and focusing and praying for the ultimate redemption, we start saying, we already have the redemption, so we don't need anything more. This is what it is. There's a parable that somebody once gave on this topic of, it's not the words of the Rebbe, this is somebody else, about he was on a ship going to America, and it's going back in the 1940s, 50s. It took quite a number of days to go over the Atlantic, to go across the Atlantic. And there was a guy that was getting, as we say in Yiddish, on Spilkes. He was waiting for America. He wanted to get there already. And when are we going to get there? When are we going to get there? All he sees is water and heaven. He thinks that America doesn't even exist, maybe. Finally, they come to Ellis Island. Ellis Island is the island where, the people would embark to get their papers checked before they came to New York. So he comes to Ellis Island and says, this is the United States of America. This must be it. And he takes off his luggage, and he's ready to set up shop on Ellis Island, because this must be it. He's looking for so long. He was anticipating so long to come to a country, a land. And he finally reaches this place. So to him, and it looks nice, it looks beautiful, to him, this must be it. He's very close by, but he's not yet there. Don't interpret Ellis Island. Don't set up shop in Ellis Island believing that you're living in the United States of America. It's a very close stop, just a little boat ride away from New York, but it's not yet it's not the actual what you were in United States of America that you were envisioning and anticipating for all this time. And the same thing there's a difference between interpreting events as a pre-taste, as a development that's leading to the redemption, or maybe even technically, yes. I mean, when Moshiach, comes, so obviously the fact that Jews were there already before the building of the Beis HaMikdash, maybe retroactively could be considered to some degree as a gathering of the Jewish people, but the actual redemption is not unfolding. When the Torah predicts in gathering of the exiles, it's not just a technical thing, there'll be Jews in Israel. This is that now once we reach the stage, we're now at the redemption. Now is the time when all the prophecies will become fulfilled. We are not there yet. Until this pattern follows as formulated by the Rambam, we don't have the actual, so to say, full-fledged or realistic ingathering of the exiles. There's much more to speak about on this point, but that's basically the formula of it's again, like I mentioned before, it's more a matter of understanding how to interpret events, and are we happy with what there is now, or and so on and so forth. I mean, there's many more other topics that branch off from this general topic. But this is one point that Rebbe spoke about. What's interesting is that in the last few talks that we merited here from the Rebbe in 1992, the Rebbe was speaking about was Parshas Vayakel, speaks about how Moshe gathered the Jewish people, and the Rebbe used the terminology that we're seeing, clearly the ingathering of Jews to the land of Israel. But here too, again, while yes, we are seeing the fulfillment of that, but the Rebbe made it very clear a few months before that this is not yet the beginning of the redemption. It's sometimes two things which sound the same, but they're not the same. You could have Jews in the land of Israel, and they have some sort of freedom that they didn't have in previous years. And they have the ability to come to the land of Israel, which they didn't have the ability in previous years. But ultimately, we're not yet by that final point of the redemption. That final point of redemption follows a very specific pattern. It starts with Moshiach, compelling the Jewish people to fulfill the Torah mitzvahs, and establishing a true Jewish independence in the land of Israel, and building the Beis HaMikdash. And only then will take place the full-fledged, the true and complete and proper ingathering of the exiles. Finish off with question that is probably a very basic question, but very important to address. Talking about, Moshiach, waiting for the arrival for Moshiach. How is it possible for me to anticipate Moshiach's coming today if I was anticipating for many years until now, every single day I was hoping and praying or believing, anticipating that he will come actually today, and he didn't come. So how am I able to continue going and to keep on every single day, praying and anticipating Mashiach's arrival today? So it's a very good question. It's a very, very basic question. The simple answer is that you have to have faith in Hashem, and but that's obviously doesn't answer the question directly. But the answer to the question is that if you understand that the potential for Mashiach's coming every day is extremely realistic, and that ultimately the more we hope for Mashiach's coming, the more he will come, so then the fact that he didn't come the day before won't discourage me from anticipating him coming today. On the contrary, the fact that he didn't come yesterday, and there's another day of the Jewish people suffering, another day of more mitzvahs that were done during that time, would, if anything, encourage me to believe that he will finally come today. But this is a topic that needs to explain properly, and there's 2 episodes that I spoke about this on season 1. Episode 15, are we supposed to await Moshiach today? And episode 16, but wasn't he supposed to come yesterday? These are season 1 episodes 15 and 16. They're available on Spotify and other platforms. It's audio only, but that's where I address this topic.